All right, coming up now on 727, it is time to play on the radio. Play that music out.
I know.
It is the morning time.
I need some Morrissey on Friday in my life.
A lot to talk about this morning. U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy joining us on the line. Sir, thanks for taking some time for our listeners this morning.
Hey, Bernie, thank you for having me.
So we want to talk about the sex trafficking bill and give us a little indication of, how it all is, how it likely will work. What can you tell us, sir?
Well, sex trafficking first is a huge issue.
Yeah.
And in it, a 14-year-old girl who runs away from home may be captured, if you will, effectively enslaved by somebody who puts her on drugs. She may do 25, 50 tricks a day.
Oh, man.
She doesn't get the money. The money goes to somebody else who physically and emotionally abuses her. It happens. So one of the things that's been facilitating this is the Internet. And you just saw Backpage.com get busted.
Yeah.
And they were running ads with little keywords like Lolita or Amber Alert, in which somebody who wished to have something like this would look for that word and then make the contact. So there's been a lot of hearings in Congress. It's kind of uncovered this. The legislation we just passed would go after those websites that do this, not those that are occasionally inadvertently, but those which consciously, systematically do it. And if you've noticed, since we've passed this legislation, the FBI has shut down Backpage.com and accusing them of money laundering, facilitating prostitution, exploitation of children, etc.
And that's what happens, too, is unfortunately the lives of these girls are ruined and they get lured into this via Facebook and, any of these other social media sites via Twitter. And, they're lured in by someone who promises, oh, I love you. Oh, let's run away together. And then, they hook them on drugs and unfortunately do this to them. And it's awful. And it's a huge problem in Louisiana.
It's a big problem. So what happens is if there's a big event like a Super Bowl, NCAA championship or something where a lot of folks are coming in, the pimps will bring these enslaved young folks to that city and then provide them there. And so if we have a Super Bowl in New Orleans, it's going to be there. And so we as a state with lots of tourism are going to have more of it, not just our young people, but also people from elsewhere. And there's lots of ministries that are cropping up to kind of address this, to help the young ladies come out of it. But we've got to do something to stop the information being transferred to allow folks to pimp out these young people.
So obviously one young lady is too many, but do you have any estimation? I mean, it may be too hard to look at nationwide, but just here in our state, do you know how many are affected? How many succumb to this?
Rob, those statistics exist, and I apologize, I don't have them top of mind. But it is a far more pervasive problem, and it's linked with the opioid epidemic. As Bernie mentioned, the pimp will get somebody hooked on drugs, and then they become emotionally and physically dependent upon them. We've introduced other legislation, for example, where that would train doctors and nurses working in emergency rooms that if somebody comes to their emergency room, what are the telltale signs that would tip you off that this person might be sex trafficked? If you think back on it, that's exactly what we used to do with spousal abuse.
Yeah.
And so now people understand what to look for when someone comes in and appears they've been abused by their spouse. Now we're doing the same thing for sex trafficking. But also they're doing it for airlines. How can a stewardess or the person, the ticket checker, what telltale signs would there be that the person being moved along would be, if you will, captured in the sex trafficking trade?
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you so much for working so hard to combat this, because it's a huge problem for our state.
Yes, it is, and for our country. And this clearly is something they're just moving people across the country.
I know, and it's just heartbreaking.
I do want to talk about some good news and something that really warmed our heart when we saw the news regarding former New Orleans Saints star Steve Gleason, who, I think more people know about him now in his fight with ALS than may have even paid attention before when he was actually playing. He got a really cool recognition from Congress.
Yeah, well, we're working on it. So for those who don't remember, Steve Gleason played for the Saints. When the Saints moved back to the Superdome after Katrina, that first game against the Falcons, when it was just rocking.
Yeah.
Blocked the punt, recovered the fumble, scores the touchdown, turns the game around. I mean, just a classic Saints story. Now he has ALS. And if you meet him, you're thinking, oh, my gosh, the guy can't talk, he can't move except for his eyes. And you walk away filled with hope because he's working with Microsoft to come up with software that with his eyes he can communicate by focusing on a keyboard, which in turn will use his voice that he pre-recorded before he lost it to give you a sound message. He's giving other people with ALS hope. We're trying to give him the Congressional Medal of Honor, which requires 2/3 of the House and the Senate. And so I just introduced this legislation yesterday or the day before. We're going to work on it with NFL, with Microsoft. We'd like to honor him. Yes, he's a great Saints player. More importantly, he's an incredible advocate for those with ALS and for those with disability.
I do want to ask you as we wrap up. Again, we're joined by Senator Bill Cassidy. I'm on the phone with us from D.C. We are getting into a really busy year as far as politics go. Midterm elections are coming up at the end of the year for a lot of people. We keep hearing of more and more Republican retirements from Congress. What should we see from that as voters down in Louisiana? Yesterday, we even talked to Senator John Kennedy, who said even he's mulling over a possible run for governor in our state, so that means that would create an opening for us in the Senate. What are your thoughts? What's the temperature, and what do Republicans think they're going to be able to do in midterm elections?
I think Louisiana is pretty solidly Republican in federal races. When I talk to people in southwest Louisiana, it's incredible, the economic boom. What we've been able to do under Trump in terms of pushing up permitting of different projects, of getting oil and gas exports going, has really brought a lot of jobs to a lot of people. Lafayette still needs to come back some more, but met this past week with people who are already planning projects in the Outer Continental Shelf. So we think that's going to start coming back and creating the jobs associated with it. When you go outside of Louisiana, some states that might be either blue or purple, those members of Congress from there may have a tougher time. Just Trump, for some people, is not the taste they wish to acquire. And so we'll have to see how that plays. If the economy's doing well, I think we do well. But even then, in some states, people just don't like Trump.
Should we expect to see more folks who are seeking re-election to use Trump to their benefit, or to be more like that candidate that recently won by kind of being the anti-Trump, a lot more moderate?
Well, it depends. The guy that won in Pennsylvania was a Democrat who basically adopted Trump's policies. So if you talk to a group of people, or if you do a poll, and you give them Trump's policy, you get about a 60 to 65% approval. If you then put Donald Trump's face next to it, it drops down to 50%. So people like the economic effect of less regulations, lower taxes, energy dominance. They love it. But Trump himself is, for some folks, just not their cup of tea. So the Democrat that won adopted his policies, but was a Democrat. Mm-hmm. Now, it may mean that our country in some ways is going to start moving more to the right, despite Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, but we just have to wait and see about that.
All right. Senator Bill Cassidy, I got to say, covered you for a really long time. I don't see you as a Trump Republican. So I guess we'll see kind of how it shakes out in the midterms. I know you're not up, but, in the future, how we tackle this. Appreciate your time.
I'm not sure how to respond to that, except so far, I think the economic agenda of Donald J. Trump has been fantastic for our country.
All right. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank
7:36.
you.